Welcome back, everyone. It is all just coming up to 3:30 Central European Time, 2:30 for me in the UK. And of course, one of the things that we've realised already here at WFS Live, people are joining us from all different parts of the world. We've already had people waking up on the west coast of America at stupid o'clock, 2, 3, 4 in the morning to be part of our discussions. And we really do appreciate their efforts, as indeed for everyone who is a speaker or a moderator, and indeed you who are here as delegates as well. And don't forget, please do spread the word about what we're doing using social media. We are on Twitter at WF Summit. We are on Instagram at World Football Summit. And the hashtag to use is WFS Live. We've got another fascinating panel today. And this one is to do with staying connected sports role in cities. Now, admittedly, it's been a tumultuous time in world affairs, in politics, in sport. And sadly, division has become a little bit more apparent in the last few years, I would say. It feels like we're a very divided world right now, doesn't it? And it's been seen particularly in cities and in communities where maybe natural cohesion in the sort of melting pot of cultures has often been challenged. And we've heard how sport is meant to be the vehicle par excellence, to affect social change, positive social change. It's got this, global appeal. It's got this huge power, but it now needs to be just that more than ever. The question is how, though? And effectively, how do you do it in terms of operations and finances in particular? Are campaigns really punching through, and are they helping the creation of cohesive community programs? How much relies on athletes to try and bridge the gap, to help resolve conflicts, to help people reconnect? And as we recover from the coronavirus pandemic, what are the prospects for sport for good in the future? I'm sure that we're going to get a good handle on the topic over the next 40 minutes or so. And this is in collaboration with Laureus and in the company of the following speakers, and you can see them there. Senior Director for EMEA Sport, Social and Community Impact at Nike, Dan Burrows. Director of Development at CONCACAF, Jason Roberts. Executive Director at America's Scores, Shannon Schneeman, and also your moderator for the session, Chief Executive at Laureus Sport for Good, Adam Fraser. Adam, we were talking off air. I have to say I'm ready to be educated in this session. It's not a subject I know huge amounts about, but I'm sure like many delegates out there, we're just waiting with bated breath to hear what your guests have to say.
Thank you, David. The education, I'm sure, will come more from those guests than from me. I'm really excited to be talking to them. Thank you to World Football Summit for having us, and thank you to the three of them for joining. Shannon is Executive Director of America Scores, as you said, which America Scores New York, which would be more than enough to qualify her for this panel. But she's also played professional football, captained her college, been named to various All-American teams, coached youth soccer, throw in some experience outside sport in global capital market for people like Barclays, and you can see she'll have some good perspectives to share. Dan has, as far as I know, not played professional football, but has spent 11 years driving forward Nike's work in a range of key spaces here, currently overseeing social and community impact for the EMEA region. Like me, has the shared history of having grown up in the UK and no longer being there. So I think, as you said, David, we're all around the world here. I think we have New York, Amsterdam, Miami covered in this panel. And Jason, I'm proud to say, is a Laureus ambassador, a former international footballer, a man who's played more than 500 professional games. I believe, Jason, across every division from the Conference to the Premier League. Also founder of the Jason Roberts Foundation in the UK and the Caribbean. And Jason himself now based in Miami as Director of Development for CONCACAF. So a fascinating role overseeing the next generation of footballers in the region. We were asked to speak today about sports role in cities, and it's a real privilege to do that and talk about sports role in social change alongside organizations like Common Goal, Soccer Without Borders, and some of the other great organizations I've seen talking today. Our role in this is interesting. The Laureus Sport for Good Cities program, also known as Model City in some markets, is based not just on the grant funding that Laureus traditionally provides to 200 organizations in 40 plus countries each year, but works to build consensus and collaboration in cities between diverse stakeholders. We're currently doing that in 8 different cities on 3 continents. And those are the organizations on the front line using sport to achieve outcomes in education, employability, equality, whether that's gender, racial, or other key areas, peace building, health and well-being, and more. Doing that, we've served more than 6 million young people over the past 20 years. but that's a very, very top line. When I look at the type of organizations we support, and I know whether it's a Laureus or a Common Goal or indeed a Nike, Dan, we're talking organizations sometimes at a level back from that work on the front ground, which we're trying to support. So Shannon, if I could just start with you, one of these organizations right on the front line. So if you could just bring it to life for us a little bit, how does America Scores make a difference in these kids' lives, and what has that looked like in a city in this year, more than any other, given the unusual challenges we faced?
Yeah, thanks so much. And really happy to be here and be part of this discussion. It's something I'm personally very passionate about, and I'm lucky that the job I get to do is something that's very focused on sports role in cities, and especially working with youth. And I think, America Scores has run grassroots, community-led programs since 2001 in New York, and in cities across the country. So we're part of a national network of affiliates, and we exclusively focus on cities. What we provide on the ground is a school-based program, which is completely free. Our mission from the beginning was to serve communities of color, to focus on communities and schools that are severely underfunded and under-resourced, and try to close that gap in the market that we see. We want equity and opportunities for kids, no matter where they grow up or where they're born, to experience sport. At America Scores, a key component of our sports program is to provide opportunities for kids to be seen and heard. And we do that through poetry and through the way that we structure the soccer programs on the ground. Youth voice is key to our program. We are, again, it's hyper local. We're partnering with schools and providing 5-day-a-week after school programs that are free, that combine soccer with poetry. It's led by teachers within the school. So these are things that are key to making sure the program is high quality, is working hyper locally with these schools. We've been fortunate to grow across the city. We started in one neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and now we're serving these community-based programs in Washington Heights, Harlem, the Bronx, and in Brooklyn. But it's always at the ground level. We're always making our program fit within the school and communities services that they already have, or services that they're lacking, and where they want us to fit in and how they want us to run programs. And especially this ability to be flexible and to be community led when we're talking about what kids need in terms of what kinds of sports programs. It's not hyper competitive. It's not a travel program. It's a community program. And during COVID, this has become very clear that programs that are about more than building sports skills and that are able to adapt to what the community needs are those that are that have been able to continue to work with their kids through this crisis. And it's more important now than it ever has. Even though we've had to pivot to do virtual programs. This in-person sports experience has gone away, but the support structure, the safe space that kids are getting, and the relationships with their coach mentors, that has persisted in different ways through the virtual setting. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to do some socially distant soccer programming as well. That's what we're providing kids, right? We're providing safe space, ability to express themselves, to heal from the many different traumas that are happening, and build those relationships with the coaches. So, for us, it's always been about more than the soccer skills that they're learning, which is great, and we know the benefit of sport. And I think for many programs like us, that's what we're seeing through this pandemic. Those other things are just as important, if not more important.
I agree more. I think it's interesting you spoke about hyper local there. So let me change the direction and go to you're at CONCACAF. You're looking at an entire region, and I could come to you with this question in based on the organization that you founded and worked directly on the ground in different countries, and I'm sure you would have some experiences that you would say would be very similar to Shannon's. But I'm also interested for a confederation that has a World Cup in a few years, that's focused on player and coach development in the region. Getting beyond that hyperlocal, how important is it that the sport comes together across multiple cities, across an entire region, and what's key to your work there?
Thank you, Adam. First and foremost, thank you to the kind people at World Football Summit for this invitation. Thank you, Adam. It's somewhat of a great collection of people that you have together here. I know Dan, I've witnessed some of the work that Dan's done, and I know very well the work being done by America Scores, and I love the poetry element of how they engage kids with sport and football in particular. To your point, from a CONCACAF perspective, or in regards to building partnerships, it's vitally important. You spoke a little bit there about my background in the Jason Roberts Foundation, which I can assure you it wasn't my choice to name it that, but I can say what I learned was that frontline interaction with the communities, and in this case, the community that I come from in inner city London, was so important in understanding that there isn't a one size fits all approach. It has to be tailor made. It has to come from the grassroots, from the communities up. And I think that's something that I've learned through my work with the Jason Roberts Foundation, which has informed the work that I do in my role as Director of Development for CONCACAF. You mentioned me being ambassador for Laureus. Well, you look at the role that Laureus plays in highlighting, in supporting grassroots organizations, in leading best practice, in leading the global agenda, and bringing additional partnerships and support to these grassroots organizations, including the likes of the Jason Roberts Foundation. And I think you already start to see that symbiotic relationship between the community-led organizations with larger organizations who are able to come in and support them. From a CONCACAF perspective, it's very much been focused on using football as a vehicle for social change. It's a phrase I'm sure we all know very well. It's something that we all believe in, but I think in reality, it's about investing in communities, bringing communities together, and also capacity building those individuals, those volunteers, those coaches, those community activators who are operating on the ground to ensure that they get the kind of support that allows them to do the work that they're capable of, and understanding the wider agenda of sport for social change. I'll tell you a brief story, Adam, if we talk about those different layers of partnerships. Is through my work with the Jason Roberts Foundation in Grenada, I understood that there was a lack of safeguarding, a lack of understanding that those who are interacting with young people should be trained in the appropriate manner in which to engage, to circumvent any issues that they may have. And as a result of that, working with the foundation in Grenada and Laureus, I understood that there was a huge impact that could be made outside of just our sport, outside of football. So one of the first things I did at CONCACAF was ensure that our training materials at E-license and D-license levels had an element of safeguarding in there, because if we are going to ensure that we are giving these people their accreditation in coaching, we want to ensure that they have the right support regarding safeguarding and being community leaders. So I think everybody has a role to play, including us at a confederation level, and certainly the grassroots organizations and the supporting organizations who bring additional partnerships and best practice. So I think there's various levels of partnership, but it's vitally important that we all understand our role and play that role.
And partnership is such a key word to this. Dan, we're proud to work with Nike in a number of ways, but I think in London especially, if we just turn there, David talked in the introduction about the world being divided, about communities being divided. And in London, our work has focused specifically on social integration and sports' role in bringing communities together. We've done that in partnership with Laureus, Nike, and the Mayor of London's office, and it's been really successful. So I'm curious, from a Nike perspective, how you see your role in bringing those communities together, and what brought you into something like the initiative in London in particular.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And Great to be here as well. In the introduction, I didn't have the elite performance piece, but I will give a shout out to the Wimbledon and District League Division 3, which was my standard. And an integral part of my experience in the city when I was living in London as well. Absolutely, Adam. I think at Nike, we recognise, as do both Jason and Shannon. I'm sure many people tuning in, the power that sport has to unite the world, to create healthy planets, active communities, and most importantly, an equal playing field for everybody, because that's really what we're trying to achieve in those cities. And I think the model city work that we're doing in partnership with Laureus and the Mayor's Office, what we like most about that is actually it's very local action. So it's about empowering coalitions to tackle self-identified issues at a local level, using sport and physical activity at the heart of those solutions. And that's putting decision-making in the hands of people locally. And, for us, that was a very innovative approach. It was a new approach to how we look at cities. So not a top-down, funding model, but actually a bottom-up funding model, really identifying those issues and giving people a voice in those communities to dictate where we should invest some of those resources, whether that's resources coming from the private sector, as in Nike, or actually the Mayor's Office. And I think that's the other thing that's very powerful about that work, is the fact that if we want to be successful in cities, I don't think anybody can solve this on their own. So it really is about collaboration, everybody really playing to their strengths to make the changes that are required. And from a Nike, point of view, I mean, globally, that's why we're invested in Made to Play, which is our commitment to get kids active around the world, to help them lead healthier, happier lifestyles, but also to impact the communities in which they live in. So I would say that's at the heart of the partnership. And, there was many examples that we're engaged in around the world of social integration. I could think of one particularly in Berlin at this moment in time that we're operating in with an NGO called Bund Kick Good. The program's called Berlin Kicked, and the International Rescue Committee and the local education system. And that's really about bringing in migrant populations into mainstream education and mainstream sport and integrating them into society. And I think as cities have evolved, I think the role of sport needs to evolve with those cities and those communities as well.
I think if we finish this panel now, then we've hit on two really key issues there, which are that this needs partnership and that this needs local leadership. Every one of you talks about the importance of empowering community decision makers, which is something we fully believe in. I'm interested, Dan, how that ties into Nike as a global brand and the purpose-led campaigns that Nike has stepped up more and more on in recent years. Where's the connection there? Do you see those purpose-led campaigns as telling the stories of those community programs or as driving investment into them? I'm just curious how we join those pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing to say is I think it's important that we recognize the role that purpose marketing or messaging has to inspire people to take action. So I think there's a really genuine role that purpose marketing can lead. I think that has to go hand in hand, as it does at Nike, with direct investment into communities, and it really being focused on impact and really looking to measure that impact as well. If I think about Nike, I mean, just to give you some figures, I think in the last fiscal year 2019, we invested $81 million directly into community impact work around the world. And I think that goes alongside the purpose marketing campaigns that you've just been talking about. And I don't think you can have one without the other, but there is a lot of power in driving messaging through a brand like Nike. And then to add to that, and I think Shannon talked about it as well, I think in these uncertain times, it is difficult certainly for corporate organizations and public sector organizations to predict the levels of investment. And what we've tried to do at Nike is really think through and really change our mindset a little bit and think through the lens of what are the current needs of our community partners and those local communities. And then how do we help them through this moment as well. One example I would give you is we launched in the summer the Community Youth Sport Fund in Europe for grassroots sports organisations to get unrestricted funding that will help them through the economic crisis of COVID. And I think that's about looking at the long-term sustainability of community investment as well. So it's not just thinking from a corporate perspective, what do we need to get out of this, but also ensuring that we're sustaining those grassroots organisations because they're the ones that are delivering on the ground. And I bring it back to what I said at the top as well. I think it's the fact that nobody can do this on their own. It's the fact that we need to play to our strengths. And if one of Nike's strengths is purpose marketing and investment, that's something we can bring to the table. But that needs to be in partnership with other corporations, NGOs, the public sector, schools, parents, mentors, coaches. I think everybody has a critical role to play.
Yeah, Adam, do you mind if I jump in there?
Please do.
Thanks. And, Dan, I appreciate that perspective from Nike. I think we've had an experience with Nike recently that reflects that through a new program that we started, which Nike supported, called Coaching for Change. And taking this back to the ground level, for an organization like America Scores, where we're centering youth voice, we approach our program with a social justice youth development lens. And I want to mention that here because the premise to that approach is that one of the most important pieces of giving youth voice is the partnership between the youth and the adults in their lives. So we can't only give them a platform to say what is important, to talk about the injustice that they face, and to talk about the why of why are there no sports programs in my community, unless we're willing to partner with them and make real change. Kids are incredible. They know what's going on and they know what affects them. And we want them to be supported as they go into adulthood. So the direct investment is incredibly important. But just as important as this advocacy piece, what can we do as the adults that care about these young people to make connections with a Nike, to fund a brand new program to train our young people to become coaches, to be able to earn some money and build some skills in their community? And that's what Coaching for Change has become. It was youth-led. Youth told us what they needed. They needed to be paid. They wanted to learn how to coach. They needed to build those skills. They may not be coaches for the rest of their lives, but this is a very important step for them. And, the trust between America Scores and Nike, the willingness to, start something new, I think that has to happen more. And like Dan said, this has to be an effort that happens at multiple levels, at the very grassroots level, directly with the youth, doing small projects in their community, to the top brands and athletes speaking out on their behalf, with all kind of the same messaging, and doing what we can to change policies and find the inequities and figure out how to change them, because we are the adults with the power and the connections. Those kids will be someday, but at least we need to listen to them now and do what we can in whatever avenues we have.
Let me just take one of those points then, Shannon, and I don't want to deviate too much from the fact we want to be talking specifically about cities. And I know there are other great panels today looking at things like athlete activism. But Jason, I'm curious, from your perspective as a former Premier League player, you look around now and we've seen Nike champion this and support their athletes, but it feels like more and more we see athletes really taking a key role on both global and local issues and using their platform to push for change. How important is that from your perspective?
Absolutely important, Adam. I'll definitely come back to that point, but I just wanted to chime in on the coaches for change and that idea that it's the investment in those coaches and what they do in the community that is so important for Nike, of course, for America Scores, and it really twins with our thinking, with what we've done. When I came into this role 3 years ago, our president Victor Montagliani was absolutely focused on the grassroots agenda. How do we provide access to the sport? How do we break down the barriers to the access to sport? And that's when we came up with a program called Next Play, which has engaged several of our 41 member associations in a partnership of working with grassroots coaches, giving them the training around using football to have fun, friendly activities, to use it as an opportunity to make better communities. And we're working very closely with global partners to ensure that this project is across our 41 different member associations in the coming years. So I'm very excited about that, but I'm also even more encouraged by the fact that speaking with these change makers on this webinar today, that is very much all centered around investment in communities, in community activators and coaches, and I'm really encouraged to hear that. Regarding athletes, I feel like athletes have such an important role to play, and I always take it back to feeling a little bit privileged in this regard, coming from a footballing family. I have 3 uncles who played professional football. One uncle in particular, Cyril Regis, was one of the first black players to play for England. He was in that famous West Bromwich Albion team, which really, I think, moved the dial in race relations in the UK back in the late 60s. So, my need to give something back really was informed by what I had seen in front of me, what I had seen ahead of me, and that these people who inspired me were people who were on the end of the phone or at my grandmother's on Sunday dinner. And I realized that I had an important role to play in giving something back to these issues, and also giving something back to the communities in which I came from. It's not lost on me that whilst my uncle became a professional footballer, my uncle Dave Regis became a professional footballer. Then my uncle Otis Roberts on the other side became a professional footballer, and I became a professional footballer. And my answer to that is the proximity to somebody who did it. And I think we've seen in my community that that giving back through the foundation has been vitally important to give people an opportunity, and that belief that if this family have been fortunate enough to do this, that it's there for them as well, not just from an elite perspective, but the benefits of playing sport. So from an athlete perspective, it's being visible, it's being able to interact with your community whilst you might be very far away. And it's also about championing some very important causes. From my perspective, having chaired the foundation and been on the management committee of the Professional Footballers Association, it was very clear to me that we had real issues around representation, that it was important that we put some things in place to challenge that. And, we did that in strengthening the equalities department within the PFA. We also did that in ensuring that we had a get on board course to give people from marginalized communities an opportunity to learn some of the boardroom behavior and governance perspectives on sport. I don't know if we've moved the dial on that yet in representation. I know that, it's a very low percentage in coaching and management, even lower in high profile roles. And it's not lost on me that, I am here based in CONCACAF with a president like Victor Montagliani, who sees equality, sees these issues as important. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to be in a position, have been in a position, first of all, as an athlete, but secondly, as an administrator, to try to give back to some of these issues, which have not only affected me, have affected the community, and I think actually affects our sport, because with true diversity comes a better product. And I think that we see that on the pitch, we see that in many sports, but we certainly don't see that in the leadership of our sports. And I think from a personal perspective, it's something that I know we have some allies who are working hard to change things, but the reality is not enough has been done. And there's lots of work that needs to be undertaken to challenge the status quo.
Jason, we could probably do a whole session just on the legacy of Cyril Regis. But it's interesting that talk of role models and that talk of representation kind of go together, and I think really track back into the community work. Shannon, in New York, how important is it that when we're looking at making change in a city, you talked about before the importance of that coming from young people, and that they know answers, they know solutions. And how important equally is it that the people who are implementing those solutions, the people who are role models for those young people, coaches, the program leaders, etc., that the right representation is there, that they have models who look like them, who understand their community, who can provide an example of a pathway for them?
It's essential, and I think that there's just so much work to do in this area. And I think it's tied to a lot of the unjust systems that are in place and have been in place for a long time. So soccer, youth programs, none of this operates in a bubble. So we're all tied to the larger systems, that I think that's why it takes a huge collective effort to change things. We have been creating more intentional ways to do this within America Scores, to try to provide some leadership in the space in making changes structurally. And for example, a year and a half ago, we created our community councils, which are formalized groups of parents, kids, coaches, teachers from the communities that we serve, to participate on these opportunities, to provide feedback, to participate on decisions around programming, and ultimately led to us being able to bring on a board member from the community council. And that was a small but very vital step to make it clear that we want the community members, people of color that we represent, to be in these positions. And the recent award from Beyond Sport to address racial inequities through a collective impact project that we're very fortunate to partner with 3 other great organizations on. This is a key focus of our work. The goal is to create ways to enable organizations to make those structural changes that are necessary, because youth do need those leaders that look like them, that have shared experiences, and I think we're excited to kind of have something to hopefully help the sector with this through sport. I think one of the keys that we're seeing with athletes speaking up, athlete activism, is that we hope that not only is this inspirational for kids to see, but the more that athletes and people who are speaking up, that are sort of in the frame for everyday life. So where sports, typically people have said, keep social justice, racial issues out of sport, that's impossible. And that's not, we know that, politics and social issues are part of sports, always will be. And the more that we sort of normalize these conversations, and people are hearing it every day, social justice becomes a conversation we can have every day. And I think it's an incredible privilege and advantage for people who don't think about social justice issues every day. Because in the reality, our kids are facing discrimination every day of their lives. And it's our responsibility to sort of make sure these conversations are part of everything that we do and every decision that we make, including when we're hiring coaches, when we're hiring staff, when we're adding new board members and leadership and all that.
Shannon, just to stay with you, I think also, we spoke before about partnerships, and Dan and I spoke about the work Laureus is doing in London and in trying to build coalitions in cities. That's something you've been involved with our work in New York. You just spoke about collective impact there, but how important is that as a tool to deliver in cities? And also, how does it support you leading one organization to be part of that collaborative with other organizations working on the front line?
Yeah, I've been part of the Leadership Council as well in New York City here, so I was part of the network before joining the Leadership Council. Now I'm on the Leadership Council, so I'm a little bit more involved. There's a lot to be said for the ability to connect, especially in a city like New York, which at times can feel just enormous and disjointed, and there are incredible programs all across the city. So the ability to have a way to connect these organizations through individual relationships and the services, professional development opportunities. We've seen a lot of value from that, for the ability to have my staff participate in trainings with other staff, making informal connections as well as getting the formal training. I think that's been critical. And then having, especially through this crisis, the pandemic, having peers to share best practices and resources with. Like we said throughout this whole conversation, no one nonprofit could serve every kid in New York City alone. No one sports organization can do it all. Partnerships are key. And I've seen, especially through the Laureus connections, it takes time to build trust in a community, and it takes time to build trust with Laureus. I think that we've gotten there, and I think people see the value, and having some kind of shared purpose with an organization like Laureus has enabled us to work better together. We're part of a sector that is funded by donations, and there's a natural competition for those dollars. But I've felt a movement towards more collaboration versus competition, which is the right direction. And I think funders like Laureus funding a collaborative can play a major role in this.
I've got some questions coming in on the Q&A. I suspect we will run out of time before we can answer too many of them, and apologies for that, and thank you for people sending them in. This could go to anyone, but Dan, you might have some interesting perspectives on this. I'm asked, what can the pandemic teach us? What can this year teach us in terms of encouraging organizations to share knowledge, share resources, share tools and workforce development, rather than keeping hold of it and keeping it in silos? And I think that this is a good example, and this week's whole programming is how you can bring people together from all around the world virtually in ways that wasn't happening to the same level a year ago. So curious about, Dan, if that extends beyond one city in Nike's thinking to sharing resources in multiple places, and Jason and Shannon, feel free to chime in as well on anything you've seen about effective sharing of resources and how this year's helped drive that.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, it's a really good question, and it's something that has been, front of our mind. What we've seen is that, there is a real desire amongst the cities that we work in and the community partners to share those learnings with each other, and maybe move away, and Shannon sort of alluded to this as well, move away a little bit from that competitive landscape, which is to a degree, we must acknowledge, driven by the funding models that we have. And I think that that's maybe a responsibility to look at how we do that as funders. But we have been hosting a whole series of webinars with our partners to bring them together for that very purpose. So, and I think, the pandemic has really sped that up. It's sped up our interactions digitally, obviously, but it's made our community partners really think through how they do the reach out to their communities at times when they can't physically see them as well. And I think that's driven a lot of learnings and a lot of information sharing between community partners, NGOs, even ourselves with other funders as well.
So, Adam, can I just chime in on that particular point? And it's something that we've learned at CONCACAF. Like many organizations, I'm sure we pivoted very quickly into using online resources. And our thoughts around that was, this is something in the future, something in the short to medium term that we would have looked at. And what's absolutely pleasantly surprised us is people's ability from various backgrounds, from various developing countries, to be able to engage online. We really felt that this would have been something which, would have been a challenge, but we were greatly surprised by people's capacity to connect, by their want and need to learn, by our opportunity to share best practice. You look at what we have today. Would we have been doing this if it wasn't for the pandemic? I hazard a guess that we might not have done it. But I think that, recognizing that there's so many opportunities to share best practice, regardless the topic, but also the fact of people's want and need to engage and connect. And we found that, of course, from our 41 different countries, from French Guyana to Grenada to St. Lucia to Guatemala, wherever it may be, it's been absolutely fantastic at the opportunities that exist, with these new online resources and opportunities. But most importantly, the bit I want to reiterate is people's ability to connect and learn. And I think that if we keep that central to our mind, I think we'll break down some of those restrictions to access to information. I think that that's greatly exciting for all of us.
I think we're going into the last couple of minutes here. If I was looking to summarize then for anyone who is interested, particularly in sports role in cities, and Shannon, you touched on the size of New York, and okay, New York's a big city, but it's something I think is true across the board. Working across a whole city is a challenging prospect for anyone to do. But I think we're hearing about being community-led, having an equity lens, working in partnership between community organizations, brands and corporates and the public bodies, and sharing resources and building collaboration rather than hoarding things. I guess, David, if there's a minute before we hand back to you, then I would just say, what am I missing? And we could all be self-congratulatory and say, hey, we're doing great work. Please come talk to Laureus, talk to the other panelists here about how you can be involved. But is there any one thing I've missed there that you think is absolutely key to this work being successful?
Adam, I can jump in and say that I think one of the things would be we do need to measure impact, and that is critically important. And maybe the one thing that we didn't really touch upon in too much detail. We need stories and we need compelling storytelling, but we need hard evidence that things are working. We know that. Everybody in this call sees it day in, day out, but we need the evidence base as well.
I would just like to reiterate that point. And first of all, thank everybody for this opportunity. But I really think that Dan has got to that really important point, that for all of the great work, for all of the great volunteers and administrators and people involved in this and the end users, actually it's about monitoring and impacting that work, showing the return on investment for all of the organizations involved in this ecosystem. And I think if there's one thing we can come away with within those partnerships is how can we effectively monitor and evaluate the work done by each chain within those partnerships to ensure we can continue to bring more support to these very important issues.
Yeah, I'll just say I agree with all of that. We need to reimagine what we view as essential services for youth. We have collectively decided public education is an essential service. When will we pivot to understanding the essential role that sports and opportunities for youth to express themselves, to be creative and be part of these kinds of organizations? When do we decide that that's essential? And I think that the funding that comes along with that is going to be critical for moving this sector forward.
Thank you all, not just for joining today, but for all the work that we do in partnership together. It's a real privilege and fantastic to have the opportunity to hear from you all today. I think hopefully a lot of these conversations continue through today and through the rest of the week. And thank you to World Football Summit again for having us and giving us the platform to talk about this work. And David, I'll hand back to you and thanks again.
No worries. Those conversations are continuing in our chat right now. I think you've really sparked that conversation. Thank you very much indeed. This session itself was a product of collaboration, and really that notion of partnership has shone through in the various initiatives that you have. Obviously, Nike and Laureus, you mentioned your social integration focus in what you guys have been doing in the locally driven approach, bottom up, as you said, and empowering the community decision makers, and also between America Scores and Wine and Nike with your coaching for change. And I think it is a really important point you mentioned, Shannon, about the advocacy piece, about what we can do as parents and guardians. As you said, we're the adults and we have the power and the connections right now, and lots of other discussion points there. And you summed it up very well, Dan. But also, I was impressed with what Shannon said about the community councils and how, again, just trusting in those people and giving them the opportunity to help form and shape what you're doing. Essentially, that's what we're saying here, being those decision makers, resulting in the board member coming from the community council as well. And then we touched on different points towards the end there about stepping away, as Dan said, from the competitive landscape and really being a lot more sharing, I suppose, with all of our tools, our resources, our best practice, and so on and so forth. So I think lots of positive messages there. And again, like with the theme of today, all of this feels very actionable. We're not talking about sort of disparate concepts here. This is change that really can be affected, and you guys are real living examples of it with your various organisations. So thank you ever so much. Really, really appreciate it, Dan, Jason, Shannon, and also to you once again for chairing the discussion. I really, really do appreciate it. We've got so many things that we need to talk about there, Adam, but you did it brilliantly. So thank you very much, everyone involved in that panel. We've got 2 more to go here on day 1 of WFS Live, and we are back in just 5 minutes time or so with football fans and sponsorship in the decade of action, shifting the perspective from consumers to global citizens, as WFS Live continues. We'll see you in a couple of ticks.